Well, thank you so very much. Good morning. Welcome to Washington. Welcome to Congress. You may consider your time here missionary work. And I just want to start with each of you by saying thank you. Thank you for taking the time and energy to be engaged, to be informed, to study, and to stand up and speak out. I think every one of us realizes our country is hanging in the balance right now. We're losing our country. The threats that we're facing are growing on a daily basis. And I believe the only path to turning things around is it's going to come from the people. It's not going to come from Congress, I promise you. It's going to come from we the people, from the citizenry standing up and speaking out. And we need to do two things. Number one, speak the truth. Speak the truth about the evil we are facing. And number two, act to defeat the evil. Right now, we're not doing either one of them. But that's what y'all are pressing to do each and every day. That's what your grassroots advocacy matters. You know, Congress will be back in session about another month before the election. In my view, both houses of Congress, we ought to be bringing up and voting on one piece of legislation after another, focused on national security, focusing on defeating radical Islamic terrorism, focusing on securing our borders, focusing on keeping this country safe. Last night, the Wall Street Journal broke that the Obama administration, in addition to the $400 million that they sent in unmarked bills, they sent an additional $1.3 billion to Iran. And they sent it the same way. They sent it in foreign currency, unmarked bills on pallets in unmarked planes, presumably landing in the dead of night. Now, let me ask you guys some just basic common sense. If we're engaged in a commercial transaction, let's say I'm buying a house for you. I'm coming to buy your house, and I arrive with 3 duffel bags filled with unmarked bills. And I say, hey, is it okay if I pay for your house with these duffel bags? Call me crazy, but that might set off some alarm bells. You might say, okay, hold on a second. What's going on here? Why aren't we at a title company? Why isn't there a check coming? Don't you have your house you're selling? The fact that the United States government is engaged in money laundering says two things. Number one, it says that the officials involved had good reason to know that what they were doing violates federal law and may well be a criminal offense. And number two, one of the reasons you commerce in unmarked bills is the officials also knew full well that this money will, to an absolute metaphysical certainty, end up financing terrorism that murders Americans, that murders Europeans, that murders Israelis, and they wanted the money untraceable. How about Congress insist on some accountability on that? How about Congress answer the questions, who is violating the law and what are the consequences? You know, we've got a similar situation by September 30th. The Obama administration is working very, very hard to give away control of the internet. By September 30th, they want to do this unilaterally. Now, the United States Constitution says any property of the federal government cannot be disposed of without authorization of Congress. This administration, that Constitution thing, they're very busy. they don't have time to read such a lengthy and complicated document. Right now, the internet, control of domain names, is governed by a nonprofit corporation under the supervision of the United States Department of Commerce. What does the federal government do with that? It keeps the internet free, it keeps it open, it keeps it free of censorship. It ensures that you don't have any governments deciding, here's what you can say and here's what you can't say. But what the Obama administration wants to do is it wants to transfer that to an international community of stakeholders, including such upstanding actors as Russia, China, and Iran. Because, what could possibly go wrong giving totalitarian governments that hate us control to censor the internet? Well, here's one thing that could go wrong. They're talking about creating like a mini United Nations in charge of the internet. Listen, freedom scares these people. They don't like a free people, unconstrained, who can speak without Big Brother deciding what's okay. A moment ago we were talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. An internet that is under the control of this mini United Nations could well in a few years decide saying something negative about the Muslim Brotherhood is unacceptable on the internet. And by the way, anyone who says, oh, come on, that's silly, no one would do that. I would encourage you, if you haven't, go back and take a look at the hearing I chaired a couple of months ago on willful blindness. Go back and listen to the testimony about this government, this administration, the Department of Homeland Security engaging in a purge. That was their word, not mine, a purge. Going through DHS records and removing any reference to the word Muslim Brotherhood, any reference to the word jihad. Doing so at the request of activists, radical Islamic activists, who said, could you please stop calling what it is? Look at the tragic terror attack in Orlando. Radical Islamic terrorist comes in, murders some 50 people. Attorney General releases the 911 call, erases the portions where he pledges his allegiance to al-Baghdadi and ISIS. They literally carve it out. And then they say, she has the temerity to say, we have no idea why he did what we did. It's willful blindness. Listen, when someone tells you, I am doing this because I pledge allegiance to ISIS, and we have declared jihad, we have declared war on America, and we are trying to kill you, when you erase that from the tape and say, gosh, we don't know why they're doing this, you are choosing to be blind to the evil that is threatening this country. The stakes are too serious for that willful blindness. There's a lot Congress can be doing. We talked a minute ago about some of the legislation that I've introduced that I think we ought to be taking up in September, taking up and voting one after the other after the other. One, the Expatriate Terrorist Act. The Expatriate Terrorist Act says if you're a United States citizen, if you go and join a terrorist organization, if you take up arms and wage jihad against the United States of America, you have forfeited your U.S. citizenship. We should not be allowing terrorists to come in on U.S. passports in an effort to wage jihad and murder innocent Americans. A related bill that I've introduced, TRIPA, would impose a 3-year moratorium on any refugees coming from countries where ISIS or Al-Qaeda or other radical Islamic terrorists control any substantial territory. This is basic common sense. The head of the FBI has told Congress they cannot vet these refugees. He said they don't have the information, for example, in Syria on who are the bad guys and who aren't. He said, and this is pretty close to a quote, he said, we can query the database till the cows come home. And if there's no information there, we're not going to find anything. And yet President Obama, and for that matter Hillary Clinton, are both bound and determined to bring in tens of thousands of refugees that the FBI has told us they cannot vet to determine whether or not they are Islamic terrorists. That's lunacy. It makes no sense. Another piece of legislation that we ought to take up and vote on and pass is the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation. That would be a sense of Congress that the Muslim Brotherhood meets the criteria for for designation as a foreign terrorist organization and should be designated as such by the Secretary of State. Now, the U.S. government has already designated individual members of the Muslim Brotherhood and branches of the Muslim Brotherhood, like Hamas, as terrorist organization, but not the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, some might say, well, gosh, isn't that just political? I mean, they're a brotherhood. What could be wrong with a brotherhood? Who's against brotherhood? Well, 5 other countries have already designated the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations: Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Russia. It's almost like maybe they know who they're dealing with. But maybe those countries are being unreasonable. It's not like the Muslim Brotherhood intends anything negative. Well, let's read from their North American strategy, and this is a direct quote. The process of settlement is a civilization jihad process. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers. That's the Muslim Brotherhood telling us what they intend to do. How about Congress spend a little less time gazing at our navels? They're delightful navels. And a little more time standing up and protecting this country from the enemies who would kill us. A final piece of legislation I'll mention is the PLO Accountability Act. On January 2nd, 2015, the so-called State of Palestine acceded to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court so that they can bring alleged war crime prosecutions against the nation of Israel. And on January 16th, 2015, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court announced the opening of a preliminary examination into accusations, and the so-called State of Palestine officially became a member of the ICC on April 1st, 2015. Now, this is an avenue that is being pursued more and more by the terrorists. It's called lawfare. It's using legal proceedings, and especially using the United Nations and its attendant international organizations as a way to attack and undermine their enemies, by which they mean the United States and by which they mean Israel. And this ICC proceeding is a clear manifestation of lawfare attempting to go after Israel, who I might note, in defending themselves from terrorist attack, engage in unprecedented efforts to minimize civilian casualties. And what does the PLO do? Well, the PLO continues to incentivize and reward terrorism. If you're a terrorist and you go and strap dynamite around your chest and you go and blow up a room full of children, The PLO will cut a check to your family and pay your family for your great service. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas previously said in September 2015, this is a quote from him, "We welcome every drop of blood spilled in Jerusalem." That's Abbas's own terms. They welcome every drop of blood. And by the way, those that they're murdering are not just Israelis, they are very often American citizens as well. Earlier this year, we saw Taylor Force, a graduate student at Vanderbilt, a U.S. Army veteran, a Texan who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, murdered in Israel by Palestinian terrorists. The PLO Accountability Act would prevent the PLO from having an office, a recognized office in Washington, D.C., from giving them the legitimacy as an international player until 5 conditions are met. That the Palestinians have not obtained state standing in the United Nations, that they've ceased their membership in the International Criminal Court, that the prosecution against Israel be dropped, that they no longer provide financial incentives and payments to terrorists imprisoned in Israel or to their families, and that they no longer engage in a pattern of incitement, celebrating those who murder innocents, celebrating terrorists, naming schools, naming streets, naming plazas, dancing in the street in celebration of murderers. At the end of the day, these challenges are hard, but they're not complicated. They're hard. These are committed people who are religious zealots who want to kill us. But they're not complicated. There is such a thing as good and evil. If you are trying to murder innocent civilians, if you are trying to murder innocent women and children, that is evil. When the Orlando terror attack occurred and I spoke out, I said, it's interesting, all of those voices on the left who are very, very focused about gay rights. How about this radical gay rights proposition? Don't murder anybody and stop murdering homosexuals in Orlando. And you saw the media scratching their heads. No, wait. A conservative Republican is not allowed to speak out for gays and lesbians. The wonderful thing about the Constitution, it protects everybody. Constitution doesn't ask what your faith is. Constitution doesn't ask what your race is, what your gender is. Doesn't ask your sexual orientation. The rights of Americans, if you are an American citizen, the Constitution protects each and every one of you, whoever you are. And yet, in the wake of that terror attack, Senate Democrats and House Democrats wanted to turn that entire issue into a gun control issue. You'll recall they staged a sit-in in the House of Representatives. Usually they're sitting in their office. They wanted to sit on the floor. It was catered. Why? Because when you've got a terrorist pledging allegiance to ISIS, the solution is to take away your guns. Who thinks that way? I actually think it's something in the water here. My advice is drink only bottled water while you're in Washington. But it seems to me Congress has an opportunity this month while we're back to shine a light, to speak the truth, and have some clarity. We ought to bring up and vote on one national security piece of legislation after another, after another. We ought to demonstrate the strength and resolve to keep this country safe, and the men and women here are critical to making it happen. So I thank you for your leadership. I thank you for your diligent efforts to stay informed, to stay educated, to stay active. And I thank you for holding every one of us accountable, holding your elected officials accountable. We work for you. A lot of people in this town forget that, but we work for you, and I thank you for holding us accountable, because we have got to protect the greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you.